Something is deeply wrong with the way this war is unfolding, because after episode 7, it no longer feels like the dance of the dragons is being fought only by armies or dragons. It feels like history itself is being manipulated. Dreams are becoming reality. Ancient prophecies are guiding impossible decisions. Characters who believed they were choosing their own fate suddenly look like pieces on a much larger board. And if you paid close attention, this episode quietly planted several connections that reach far beyond House of the Dragon, all the way to Game of Thrones itself. From mysterious dragon dreams to hidden symbolism, from shocking betrayals to echoes of the Long Night, episode May 7th have revealed why this entire Targaryen civil war was always bigger than a battle for the Iron Throne. So, let's break down every major moment, uncover the hidden details you probably missed, and explain how this episode completely changes what we thought we knew about the future of Westeros. Episode 7 wastes absolutely no time reminding us that power in Westeros has never been about swords alone. It has always belonged to those who understand things that other people cannot see. Throughout this episode, nearly every major decision is influenced by prophecy, memory, or fear of the future rather than what is happening in the present. That is an important shift because it tells us the writers are slowly transforming the story from a political civil war into something much larger. One of the strongest themes running through the episode is the idea that knowing the future is not the same as being able to change it. We have seen prophetic dreams before in the Targaryen family, but episode 7 pushes this concept further than ever. Characters who possess knowledge of future events are not becoming stronger. Instead, they are becoming prisoners of what they know. This creates an interesting parallel with Game of Thrones. Think about Bran Stark. Once Bran gained the ability to see through time, he stopped behaving like an ordinary person. He became distant because he understood that history often repeats itself. Episode 7 suggests something very similar may be happening here. Every prophecy is becoming less about preventing disaster and more about surviving it. The episode also continues exploring the burden carried by the Targaryens. Dragons are often described as symbols of strength, but this episode repeatedly hints that dragons may also represent a curse. Several conversations imply that bonding with dragons changes people emotionally. Instead of making rulers wiser, dragons encourage pride, violence, and absolute confidence. That idea connects beautifully with one of the biggest themes from Game of Thrones. Nearly every ruler who believed they alone could save the realm eventually became dangerous. Whether it was Daenerys believing she alone could build a better world or Cersei believing fear guaranteed peace, absolute certainty always led toward destruction. Episode 7 quietly places another Targaryen on that same road. What makes this especially interesting is that the episode rarely tells us someone is changing. Instead, it lets us notice tiny behavioral differences. Characters who once hesitated now act without asking questions. Leaders who once listened to advice begin trusting only themselves. Those are subtle details, but they are exactly how the writers show corruption beginning. Another fascinating detail appears in the way several scenes are framed around isolation. Even when surrounded by loyal followers, many characters appear emotionally alone. This is not accidental. House of the Dragon has always shown that power separates rulers from ordinary people, but episode 7 takes that loneliness to another level. Nobody completely trusts anyone anymore. Friends question each other's motives. Families hide secrets. Allies prepare backup plans. Even victories feel temporary because everyone suspects betrayal is coming next. That atmosphere is incredibly important because it mirrors the final seasons of Game of Thrones. By the end of that series, almost every alliance existed only until it stopped being useful. Episode 7 feels like the beginning of that same transformation. Another detail many viewers may have overlooked is how often the episode returns to conversations instead of battles. On the surface, some people might think not much happened. But these conversations are actually preparing the next major conflict. Every important discussion accomplishes two things. First, it explains what characters believe. Second, it quietly reveals what they are refusing to admit. That difference matters. For example, when someone claims they are fighting for peace, their actions usually reveal ambition. When someone claims loyalty, their eyes often reveal doubt. House of the Dragon has become incredibly good at letting body language contradict dialogue, creating tension without needing constant action scenes. The political situation also becomes much more unstable during this episode. Each side believes time is running out. Resources are shrinking. Dragons are injured. Commanders are exhausted. And ordinary people continue suffering while noble families argue over crowns. That last point becomes another direct connection to Game of Thrones. One lesson repeated throughout George R. Martin's world is that common people always pay the highest price for wars started by powerful families. Episode 7 never lets us forget that. While kings and queens debate destiny, villages burn. While nobles discuss honor, innocent families lose everything. This contrast makes the conflict feel far more tragic because there are no true winners. Perhaps the most important development, however, is psychological rather than military. Several characters begin acting according to the stories they tell themselves. Some believe they are heroes. Some believe they are chosen. Some believe fate protects them. History has shown us that those beliefs are incredibly dangerous. Game of Thrones repeatedly punished characters who believed destiny guaranteed success. Robb Stark believed honor would protect him. Stannis believed prophecy guaranteed victory. Daenerys believed destiny justified every decision. None of them escaped the consequences. Episode 7 quietly suggests the same mistake may already be happening once again. And if that interpretation is correct, then the most dangerous weapon in this war is no longer Dragonfire. It is certainty itself. As Episode 7 moves into its second half, the focus shifts away from prophecy and towards something even more dangerous: trust. By now, almost every major player has realized that dragons alone cannot win this war. Information, deception, and timing have become just as powerful as fire. The battlefield is no longer limited to castles or open fields. It now exists inside every private conversation, every secret meeting, and every decision that is made behind closed doors. One of the biggest themes in this episode is that nobody truly controls the events they believe they have started. Every choice creates consequences that spread much further than expected. A commander sends an army forward expecting victory, only to weaken another front. A queen places faith in a trusted advisor, only for doubt to begin growing inside her own council. A prince tries to protect his family, but unknowingly creates new enemies in the process. This chain reaction is exactly what makes George R. Martin's world feel so realistic. Every action has a cost, even when the intentions seem noble. This becomes especially important when we look at the growing cracks inside both factions. Earlier in the season, the conflict appeared fairly simple. One side wanted to secure its claim, while the other wanted to defend its own. But Episode 7 shows that the real battle has shifted inward. Internal division has become a greater threat than the enemy across the battlefield. That idea immediately brings us back to Game of Thrones. Think about the downfall of House Stark after King Robert's death. The Lannisters were certainly dangerous, but many of the Starks' greatest problems came from internal disagreements, divided loyalties, and different ideas about honor. The same pattern appears here. Every council meeting feels less like a room full of allies and more like a room full of people calculating their next move. One detail that stood out throughout the episode is how often silence speaks louder than dialogue. Several characters hesitate before answering important questions. Others avoid direct eye contact. Some give answers that are technically true while hiding their real intentions. The writers clearly want viewers to pay attention not only to what is being said, but also to what is being left unsaid. That storytelling style has always been one of the greatest strengths of both House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones. Instead of explaining every motivation, the audience is invited to notice the tension themselves. A single pause can reveal fear. A short glance across a room can hint at betrayal. A quiet smile can become more threatening than an army of soldiers. Episode 7 also continues building one of the show's most fascinating ideas, that dragons are becoming increasingly unpredictable. Earlier in the story, dragons often represented overwhelming military power. Whoever possessed more dragons appeared destined to win. But now that certainty is disappearing. The dragons are wounded. Some writers hesitate. Others act emotionally rather than strategically. And every battle risks losing creatures that can never truly be replaced. This completely changes the balance of power. Instead of asking which side has the stronger dragons, Episode 7 asks which side can afford to lose them. That question carries enormous weight because the audience already knows where this story eventually leads. By the time Game of Thrones begins, dragons are almost extinct. Seeing them injured, divided, and constantly thrown into increasingly desperate situations makes that future feel inevitable rather than surprising. Another subtle connection to Game of Thrones comes through the idea of legacy. Throughout the episode, several characters speak as though history will remember them kindly if they simply achieve victory. But viewers who have watched Game of Thrones already know history is rarely that fair. Many rulers who believed they would become legends were remembered as monsters instead. This creates dramatic irony. The characters are fighting for how future generations will remember them. The audience already knows many of those future generations barely remember them at all. Entire families disappear. Powerful dragons vanish. Magnificent castles fall into ruin. Even the Iron Throne itself eventually becomes nothing more than melted steel. That perspective makes every victory in Episode 7 feel temporary. The episode also continues strengthening the mystery surrounding ancient Targaryen knowledge. Certain conversations seem to suggest there are still pieces of history that have not been fully revealed. Some characters understand fragments of old prophecies, while others possess only incomplete versions passed down through generations. This directly echoes one of the central mysteries of Game of Thrones. Very few people ever understood the complete truth. The White Walkers were misunderstood. The Children of the Forest were forgotten. Azor Ahai became little more than legend. Even Aegon's prophecy survived only because a handful of people secretly preserved it. Episode 7 reinforces the idea that knowledge itself is fragile. Once a single generation fails to pass on the truth, history becomes myth, and myth eventually becomes fantasy. Perhaps the most heartbreaking part of this episode is watching good intentions slowly transform into dangerous decisions. Nobody wakes up intending to destroy their family or burn the realm to the ground. Instead, they convince themselves that one more sacrifice is necessary. One more betrayal can be justified. One more innocent life can be traded for peace. That is exactly how every great tragedy in Westeros begins. Not with evil, but with people believing they have no other choice. And by the end of Episode 7, that belief is spreading faster than Dragonfire itself. Even more worrying, several characters now seem convinced that victory will solve everything. But if Game of Thrones taught us anything, it is that winning the throne has never guaranteed peace. Sometimes, the moment someone finally claims ultimate power is the exact moment they begin losing everything. As Episode 7 reaches its final act, the story quietly reveals something that may become one of the defining ideas of House of the Dragon. This war is no longer simply deciding who sits on the Iron Throne. It is deciding what kind of world will exist after the dragons are gone. Every battle, every betrayal, and every sacrifice is slowly pushing Westeros toward the broken kingdom we eventually see in Game of Thrones. One of the biggest moments in this episode is the realization that fear has completely replaced loyalty. Earlier in the season, rulers inspired people through family ties, duty, or shared purpose. Now, almost every important decision is motivated by survival. Lords are beginning to ask a different question. Instead of wondering who has the rightful claim, they are asking who is most likely to survive. That change is incredibly important because it mirrors one of the greatest political lessons from Game of Thrones. Power is unstable when it depends only on fear. We watched this happen with Joffrey. We watched it happen with Ramsay Bolton. We watched it happen with Cersei during the final seasons. Fear can force obedience for a while, but it rarely creates lasting loyalty. Episode 7 shows the same transformation beginning here. Several powerful houses are becoming increasingly cautious. They are watching both sides carefully, waiting for the perfect moment to shift their support if necessary. This uncertainty makes the coming conflict even more dangerous because a single betrayal during battle could completely change the outcome. The episode also spends a surprising amount of time reminding us that dragons are not invincible. Throughout the history of Westeros, dragons have often appeared unstoppable. But this story keeps proving otherwise. Every injury matters. Every rider loss changes the balance of power forever. Every reckless decision weakens the future of House Targaryen itself. This is one of the strongest connections to Game of Thrones. By the time Daenerys brings dragons back into the world, people treat them almost like myths. Many characters have never even seen one before. Episode 7 helps explain why. The Dance of the Dragons is becoming a disaster that destroys not only people, but also the very creatures that made House Targaryen unstoppable for generations. In many ways, this civil war becomes the beginning of the family's decline. Another fascinating detail is how the episode handles prophecy. Earlier, prophecy felt like guidance. Now it feels more like a warning. Characters keep searching for certainty, but every attempt to understand destiny only seems to create more confusion. This creates another powerful connection to Game of Thrones. Melisandre believed she understood the prince that was promised. Stannis believed prophecy guaranteed his victory. Even Daenerys believed destiny had chosen her to save the world. All of them misunderstood at least part of what they believed. Episode 7 suggests that history may be repeating itself once again. The danger is not prophecy itself. The danger is believing your interpretation can never be wrong. That lesson may become one of the most important themes of the entire series. The emotional weight of this episode also comes from watching relationships slowly fall apart. Families that once stood together now struggle to trust one another. Friends begin keeping secrets. Advisors choose their own ambitions over the good of the realm. Every conversation feels like it could become the last peaceful discussion before another tragedy unfolds. That emotional collapse is just as significant as any dragon battle. George R. Martin has always written wars that begin inside families before they spread across kingdoms. Episode 7 continues that tradition perfectly. The greatest wounds are not always caused by swords. Sometimes they are caused by disappointment, guilt, and impossible choices. Looking ahead to Episode 8, several major questions remain unanswered. Can either faction truly win without destroying itself? Will prophecy continue guiding decisions, or will someone finally reject the future they have been shown? Can the remaining dragons survive another massive confrontation? And, perhaps the biggest question of all, has the fate of House Targaryen already been sealed? If the writers continue following the themes established throughout the season, the answer may already be hidden in plain sight. Game of Thrones showed us a Targaryen dynasty that had lost almost everything. Very few dragons remained. The family itself had nearly vanished. Ancient knowledge had been forgotten. Even Aegon's prophecy survived only as a fragmented secret passed between a handful of rulers before disappearing altogether. House of the Dragon is showing us exactly how that happened. Not through one catastrophic battle, not because of one villain, but because generations of fear, pride, revenge, and misplaced certainty slowly destroyed the strongest family in Westeros from within. That is what makes Episode 7 so compelling. Every victory comes with a hidden cost. Every alliance feels temporary. Every prophecy creates another mystery. And every dragon that takes to the sky reminds us that we are watching the final golden age of these magnificent creatures slowly burn itself away. With only one episode left, every decision now carries enormous consequences. The battle ahead will determine far more than who wears the crown. It will shape the future of the Seven Kingdoms, lay the foundation for the world we eventually see in Game of Thrones, and leave scars that history will remember for centuries. The throne may still stand at the end of this war, but the dynasty that built it may never truly recover.